The year is 2016. A documentary is released to the public, detailing the unknown history of New Bordeaux, a city run by the Marcano crime family. The events within the documentary follow what happened to the criminal family during the year of 1968. It was a year meant to be filled with hope and ambition for the family. Sal Marcano, the head of the family, was making moves to go legitimate. Tired of living under the heel of the commission, he no longer wanted to be governed by blood and drug money, or seeing his son and underboss Giorgi endure the same sleepless night he's had to endure for the last 40 years. Sal has been investing in the construction of a new hotel and casino to legitimize his income sources. Naturally, this was a massive financial undertaking, one that was only made worse by the fact that gambling was still illegal. Desperate to get out of the mob life, Marcano would enlist politicians, judges, and political figures on his payroll to ensure the construction and legitimacy of the casino is complete. But this documentary isn't about the rise of some prestigious hotel or the unknown dealings of a powerful family that has some secret mafia beginnings. No, this documentary is about the man who single-handedly brought this powerful criminal enterprise down.
War on the streets of our fair city as a gunman stormed the Royal Hotel.
Public statement.
Jacobs was killed this evening in a fiery explosion aboard a riverboat. Local businessman Louis Marcano also lost his life
At a time.
Remy Duval was savagely murdered. Witnesses report he was bound to a cross and set on
John
fire.
Donovan and Lincoln Clay embarked on a campaign of urban destruction this country hadn't seen since the Civil War.
Lincoln's mother abandoned him in 1947, a couple of years after he was born. His mother, I heard she was Dominican. I always figured his father was white, maybe even Italian. Not that it mattered. Back then, if you look black, you black.
In order to properly follow the disintegration of the Marcano crime family, we must begin at the start with the testimony of Father James. He is an invaluable source. No one really knows what happened to Lincoln Clay, the full events of 1968, or Lincoln's upbringing. Much of it was all shrouded in a thick fog, only slightly illuminated by coincidences and educated guesses. Father James not only knew Lincoln as a child, but had direct contact with him during his reign of terror against the Marcanos. According to Father James, Lincoln was born in 1945. It's believed Lincoln's mother was Dominican with possibly a white or Italian father, which would have made Lincoln mixed. However, with the story taking place in the southern part of the United States during the 1960s, the perception on race inequality wasn't exactly in the young kid's favor. The poor boy had a path set with opposition and hardship predestined for him for simply the color of his skin. It was an injustice only made worse by Lincoln being abandoned by his mother around 1947. She would leave him at the St. Michel's orphanage in the French Ward district of New Bordeaux. This is how Father James would first come to meet Lincoln.
After I was discharged, I wandered around for a couple, 3 months, did some odd jobs. I got arrested once or twice for fighting. But I always kind of knew I was going into seminary. It just took a little while for it to sink in, I suppose. Once I was done with seminary, Bishop Jenkins sent me to St. Michel's Home for Colored Boys.
Father James had previously served as a medic during World War II, and following his military service, he had a calling to balance the death and suffering he endured and inflicted on others during his war years. He would attend a seminary hosted by Bishop Jenkins, and upon his completion, Father James assisted with the children at the orphanage, teaching them right from wrong and how to turn the other cheek, to never lash out of anger or follow a path of vengeance and destruction. Core tenets he would later repeat to Lincoln as an adult many years later. Now, there isn't much else shared on what happened at the orphanage, considering nothing remarkable was ever noted, such as constant fights or bouts of anger or depression. The time here must have boded well for both Lincoln and the father, with them even developing a somewhat close bond. The trouble for Lincoln would come sometime later in the year of 1958, when the city made the decision to close down the orphanage. Now, since many of the children here had nowhere else to go, especially those that were looked down upon for the color of their skin, their options were severely limited. Because of this, Lincoln would quickly fall under the supervision of a man by the name of Sammy Robinson. Sammy was the head of the black mob, and he ran the Delray Hollow district for Sal Marcano, who had the entire city under his control. Lincoln would come to look to Sammy and his wife Perla like they were his own parents. He would even take a liking to Sammy's son Ellis, quickly developing a brother-like connection. As Father James points out, he didn't exactly like that Lincoln had fallen in with the black mob. He didn't have much of a choice though. The orphanage was closed, and with Lincoln Clay being black, what other option did he really have? Now, while Lincoln might have had some sort of break in terms of how Sammy, Perla, and Ellis treated him, finally being loved and accepted by essentially being a part of a family that he never had, a strong bond as it is, but it was a bond that must have been cemented even more in some way due to the shared hardships handed to them based off their own skin color. But even with a slightly more comfortable time with the Robinsons, it was clear Lincoln possessed a void deep within him. Despite finally being accepted as part of some familial heritage, Lincoln looked to the military, possibly as a way to escape, a place to finally belong, or maybe a little bit of both. At this time, tensions between the United States and the Soviet-backed North Vietnam was beginning to explode into what is now known as the Vietnam War, a perfect opportunity for somebody such as Lincoln to rally behind a cause, to finally have a purpose and just maybe not be tied down by the shade of his skin color or haunted by his own personal pain, lingering questions of why his mother and father would just abandon him. It's during his time in Vietnam, Lincoln would receive more than just his basic military training. Lincoln would come to distinguish himself for his bravery and iron will. He would be rewarded with 2 Purple Hearts, a Bronze Star, and a Distinguished Service Cross. These are achievements that would make the greatest war heroes blush at the thought of having such a revered soldier as Lincoln Clay fighting by their side. It's these very achievements that will introduce Lincoln to what would soon be one of his closest friends, a man by the name of John Donovan.
Donovan? John?
Well, when did you meet Lincoln Clay?
1966. I was running Black Ops out of Laos on behalf of the CIA. He was loaned out to me via joint CIA-DOD task force.
Lincoln would first meet Donovan in 1966. At this time, John Donovan was running Black Ops operations out of Laos on behalf of the CIA. Lincoln was lent out to him on behalf of a joint CIA-DOD task force. Donovan and Lincoln would come to not only highly respect each other, but become very good friends. Lincoln would be trained in psychological warfare as part of his work with Donovan, and the two of them would become a massive force to be reckoned with. Donovan's training alone was more than enough to make sure someone like Lincoln, who, as he put it, was the type of person you point in the right direction to get the fuck out of their way, had the Viet Cong and NVA completely terrified. While Lincoln's reason for joining the military might have been to find a purpose, to finally know what it feels like to belong, to fight that feeling of wondering why you were just thrown away and abandoned as a child like he was, to be freed from his own personal pain and torrent of constant questions, all Lincoln was really met with was more anguish. He may have been someone who thrived as a soldier and excelled in times of conflict, but at his core, he would never really be the same. Father James, being a distinguished war hero himself, would enlighten us on the thoughts and feelings soldiers returning home would soon have to face, a reality that none of them are properly prepared for.
Imagine being trapped in a dark room and there's no way out. And every fear, every nightmare you ever had is in that room with you. And there's no escape from any of it. And then one day, a door opens and you're free to go. Just like that. The thing is, you made your peace with your terror and your fear of death. And now part of you is afraid to leave it behind. But what choice do you have? Every soldier has to walk through that door, one way or another.
The father's description of a soldier's own struggles returning home from wartime is but a small glimpse. It's a perspective that's broadened and further deepened by the horror stories of what Lincoln personally saw or had to deal with. Throughout the documentary and the game itself, there'd be accounts of Vietnamese women callously throwing their own children into a pond to secure a spot for herself and a pig on an American helicopter, explaining she can always make another baby but she can't find another pig, or stories of other women stepping into a GI bar and unexpectedly blowing soldiers up with a grenade. And then there's Donovan himself, explaining his own tactics of extracting valuable information out of NVA informants, tactics Lincoln was undoubtedly well versed in, that was various methods of torture. While he left to find a purpose, he may have lost another part of him, and without even realizing it. At one point, Lincoln would even describe having a recurring nightmare returning home from Vietnam. In this dream that he describes, he's back sleeping in a foxhole in Vietnam. He's suddenly awakened to see many dark figures surrounding him. They come out of the shadows, and while he does his best to fight them off, they hold him down and tie him up. They stuff a muddy rag in his mouth to make sure he can't warn the men sleeping next to him. Then he's forced to listen as the men next to him that he couldn't warn die one by one. It's undeniable Lincoln is suffering from PTSD, as many soldiers would, especially those taking part in Black Ops operations, with the minuscule details we do know involving some forms of torture. But in 1968, just 2 years after meeting and working with John Donovan, Lincoln Clay would finally return home to New Bordeaux. Now, the plan was initially to just briefly visit so he could give his adopted family members, Sammy and Ellis Robinson, a proper goodbye. Lincoln had met a friend in the service who promised him a job at the Mare Island shipyard in California. New Bordeaux could have been nothing but painful memories and ghosts for Lincoln, so a fresh start to an honest life would have done him good, something positive to look forward to. Unfortunately, though, when Lincoln returned home, Sammy and Alice were in a bad spot. They'd been dealing with some problems with the Haitians for quite some time. Initially starting off as a few robberies here and there within the Hollow, the Haitian activity has exploded into them going after the lottery, which in turn was affecting Sammy's ability to pay up to Sal Marcano. The Haitians were not only causing the Hollow to be seen as much more dangerous, but was putting Sammy and the Black Mob in a very dangerous position against the man who ran the whole city. Lincoln would decide to extend his stay. He would personally see to it these Haitians were dealt with, Sammy and Sal were settled, and once everything was much more calm and at ease, then he would officially give his adopted father and brother a heartfelt farewell. Seemed fair enough, but as Father James put it, Lincoln's decision to get involved with the Haitians and Sal Marcano on behalf of Sammy was quite possibly his biggest mistake. That would hold to deep ramifications for everyone felt in every corner of New Bordeaux.
I've spent the last 48 years pursuing Lincoln Clay because he's a criminal. It's horrible what happened to him, but you know something? I think that when Sammy, Ellis, and Danny Burke were killed, it revealed who Lincoln Clay really was. A monster.
There's no better time than now to introduce Jonathan McGuire. Lincoln Clay would come to be this man's bane of existence. Where Father James is valuable in providing insight to Lincoln Clay's upbringing and activities from a more sympathetic perspective, John Donovan is helpful by being a valuable source. He directly aided Lincoln in his quest to methodically dismantle the Marcano crime family, and his testimony that he provided during his hearing before the U.S. Senate Select Committee on Intelligence in August of 1971 would be invaluable in helping everyone establish a timeline for the actions of Lincoln Clay in 1968, as well as a fundamental understanding of how the Marcanos ran New Bordeaux. Nonetheless, Jonathan McGuire was recruited to the FBI straight out of college in 1966. His first assignment with the Bureau would place him in Chicago until he was sent down to New Bordeaux in 1968. Initially, McGuire's attention was actually caught by the Marcanos. A woman would share the night Sammy's bar burned down. She would notice Sal, his son Giorgi Marcano, and another unknown associate was seen fleeing the burning building. Interested in the source of why a powerful man such as Sal Marcano, also a white man, would be seen leaving a burning building in the region of New Bordeaux dominated by a population of black citizens. McGuire would prepare to bring up charges against Marcano when he's stonewalled by the corrupt Judge Holden, whom Sal Marcano had in his back pocket. This is of course information that was unknown to Jonathan McGuire at the time, but it's interesting to realize Lincoln Clay only caught McGuire's attention because they were essentially after the same guy. Just Lincoln was able to bring down the mob and reach Sal Marcano in a way no one else could or really be willing to. The actual how, when, and why, from Lincoln's perspective anyways, would come from John Donovan's testimony supplemented by a few key details by Father James. According to the father, After Lincoln helped deal with the Haitians by killing what was believed to be their leader, a man by the name of Baca, when he returns to Sammy with the news things should return to normal in the Hollow, he's met with the news Sal Marcano wants to meet with him. Sal has a plan in mind that'll not only earn enough money to square things up between the Black Mob and the Italian mob, who haven't received a payment from the Black Mob in 3 months, but this job would earn more than enough money anybody involved could ever know what to do with. And it was a job that can only be achieved with the help of the Black Mob. So at the humble request of Sal Marcano, Lincoln would go and meet with him as a representative of the Black Mob. During this meeting, Lincoln would meet with one of the underbosses that would later help him retake the city from Sal Marcano. This man was none other than Vito Scaletta. Lincoln was straight out of the military, and he would share his achievements with Vito, who himself served in the military during World War II. While Vito was initially impressed with Lincoln's glorious military service, the tone of this meeting would be undermined by the rocky relationship between Sal and Vito. Following Vito's actions in Empire Bay, he was exiled by the Commission down to New Bordeaux, placed as a lieutenant of Sal Marcano's. Out of respect for Leo Galante, who arranged all of this, Sal would accept Vito and give him the River Road district of New Bordeaux. Despite accepting Vito as part of his organization, deep down, Sal mistrusted Vito. He believed Vito was placed there as a mole for the Commission, since as a way to keep a close eye on Sal Marcano and report back to the Commission on any transgressions Sal may be committing against the Commission. Paranoid of Vito's intentions and describing the man as an asshole and pain in his ass since he was sent down from the Commission 15 years ago, there was nothing Sal could really do about Vito. Whether he liked it or not, Vito was a made man and could not be touched. He's not allowed to be killed without due cause and approval from the Commission. Sal Marcano would, however, find the proper due cause with this very job he summoned Lincoln Clay for. This is the introduction to the heist on the Federal Reserve. Sal would share with Lincoln twice a year there's some amount of cash taken out of circulation. This cash shipment, intended to be destroyed, is sent to the Federal Reserve here in New Bordeaux, and it's expected to arrive within the next few days. The shipment itself is just a front though. Sal's real goal is to use this shipment as a front to gain access to the Federal Reserve's vault, and steal whatever isn't nailed down. According to their calculations, there's an estimated $6 to $7 million within, or a modern $54.3 or $63.3 million. Vito is going to front most of the cash and already provided the code to the vault. The Black Mob was already helping by one of Sammy's men grabbing the uniforms worn by Giorgi and Lincoln Clay the day of the robbery, and another of Sammy's men, working as a janitor within the Federal Reserve, provided a rough layout of the building. Thomas Burke, leader of the Irish mob, would also lend a hand in this job. The history behind Thomas Burke and Sal Marcano could be described as once mutually beneficial. That was until Thomas Burke botched a smuggling job that costed Sal a lot of money. As punishment, Sal took the district of Port Verdun from Thomas and placed it under the control of Roman the Butcher Barbieri. Barbieri didn't exactly like Thomas Burke, so taking Point Verdun from him wasn't enough. He would break one of Thomas's legs, giving the man a permanent limp. Handicapped and ashamed of what happened, Thomas desperately wanted to return to Sal's good graces, hoping that if he partook in the robbery of the Federal Reserve, and if it was a success, then just maybe Sal Marcano would return Point Verdun to Thomas Burke. So, Thomas would offer his son Danny to aid in the robbery, and Danny's position would be to situate a powerful drill Thomas Burke engineered in order to create a hole in the floor of the Federal Reserve's vault where Lincoln and Giorgi would throw the stolen money down into. At the bottom of said hole, Alice and Danny would be catching the cash in a boat ready to make a swift getaway. Everything was planned and set. Something that made this job somewhat easier between everyone doing all the heavy lifting was they were all close friends. Alice, Danny, Giorgi, and Lincoln all knew each other and spent much time together before Lincoln was shipped off to Vietnam. This is worth pointing out because everything that transpires later on only makes the betrayal that much more sinister. But with everything seemingly taken care of and Lincoln's acceptance of helping with this job, there was one more thing Sal had to address in this meeting. Sal has been growing increasingly dissatisfied with how Sammy has been running Del Rey Hollow. Approaching the topic very respectfully, aware of how deep Lincoln's love for the man that took him in is, Sal would propose with the success of the Federal Reserve heist concluded, perhaps Lincoln would be willing to accept the position of running Del Rey Hollow, effectively replacing Sammy. In an effort to appease Lincoln's doubt, Sal would make it clear the Federal Reserve job would give Sammy more than enough to comfortably retire, and if Lincoln had any doubts beyond that, Sammy and Sal go way back, so Sammy would understand this decision. There would be no cause for concern for Lincoln.
I want you to run the holler. I can't do that. He took me in when I had nowhere else to go. Treated me like a son. I'm sorry, Mr. Marcano. I can't do that to him.
Well, shit, son.
Unaware of this rejection of Sal's offer would put Lincoln Clay, Sammy, and Ellis Robinson, the whole black mob, and Danny Burke on Sal Marcano's shit list right next to Vito Scaletta. No one denies what Sal Marcano wants. No matter. Everyone involved with this robbery all believe it's for the money inside the vault. In secrecy between Sal and Giorgi, what they were really after was the money plates inside the Federal Reserve vaults. Once in Sal's possession, he could run a successful money counterfeit operation to fund his plans of building a casino and getting out of this criminal life. Lincoln's rejection to run the Hollow could have been seen as disrespectful or just leaving Delray Hollow in a position of uncertainty from Sal's position. Building the casino, he would have needed security and allegiance from all of his lieutenants, a risk he couldn't afford to take. He needed a level of loyalty and security that was extremely high because the commission would not have approved the casino he was building, plus gambling was illegal, so there was a lot Sal had to already deal with, let alone leave any loose ends up in the air. Sammy's inability to handle the Haitians, while Lincoln's rejection to take over out of the love and loyalty to Sammy meant a hostile takeover of Delray Hollow was in order. The day the heist took place, everything began smoothly. The uniforms and IDs worked out. The money Vito provided allowed Giorgi and Lincoln to gain access to the burn room, which was right next to the vault, and the code for the vault Vito procured worked like a charm. The first of two problems arose when Giorgi sent Lincoln out of the vault to gather up some cash from a neighboring room. While Lincoln was distracted, Giorgi would open up the cage inside the vault that stored the money plates that he was after. It just so happened that cage was on a separate alarm system, resulting in the room being flooded by armed police. The pair would be able to defend themselves from the waves of guards, but with the alarm going off, it restricted their ability to leave out of the front door. So, Danny Burke would decide to plant some dynamite to blow a hole big enough in the vault's floor to both allow the money and men to escape that way. The plan didn't go as expected though. Instead of the hole getting bigger, it instead brought the entire vault down, which caused a huge chunk of cement to pin Danny's leg, effectively breaking it, making him unable to walk. Despite these hiccups, the robbery would be a success. Under the cover of Mardi Gras, the robbers were able to hide from pursuing police within the crowd and make their way all the way back to Sammy's bar. They did at one point get separated from Giorgi, but he would end up showing back up at Sammy's bar with his father sometime later. Sal would bring an associate of his to collect his money, and this associate would be Richie Doucette. He's the unidentified man the woman who identified Sal and Giorgi leaving Sammy's bar turns out to be. But as the group celebrates a robbery that would, in essence, change all of their lives, Richie Doucette began to pack up Sal's portion of the money. Sal would begin to exchange words with Sammy, lulling him into a false sense of security, and concluding the exchange with a hug, a predetermined signal for Giorgi to understand the time to act is now. As Ellis goes to get liquor off the top shelf behind the bar, with his back turned to everyone else, Giorgi would comment on how his friend, Lincoln Clay, is the baddest motherfucker he's ever laid his eyes on, but he shouldn't have said no. At which point he pulls a pistol out and fires point blank at Lincoln's head. The bullet wouldn't be fatal, at least not instantly. Lincoln would be knocked unconscious, and while dazed on the floor, he'd catch glimpses of his closest loved ones die. Sammy would be stabbed by Richie Doucette while Giorgi's seen dealing with Danny. Lincoln blacks out again to see his adopted father crawling on the ground, already shot at least twice in the back. Sammy's bleeding, attempting to get away, while Sal's standing menacingly over him. He'd execute Sammy with 3 more gunshots to the back of his head, at which point Richie Doucette packs up all the cash and Giorgi lights the bar on fire. Dazed and bleeding from the gunshot wound to his head, Lincoln would have been claimed by the fire, making his fate no different than Sammy, Ellis, and Danny. But his father James shares, by the chance of luck, divine providence, or a force even he couldn't explain, he was brought to Sammy's bar that night. He would venture into the burning building, and upon seeing Lincoln moving around, would pull him out of the fire. Lincoln would be conscious just long enough to tell the father to contact John Donovan. It's a phone call the father would come to regret making for the rest of his life.
Sal Marcano deserves to die. I won't argue otherwise. Kill him. But let that be the end of it.
That's not enough!
It's enough if you say it's enough.
After being pulled out of the fire at Sammy's by the father, For the next few months, Lincoln would be nursed back to health by Father James, praying over him and making sure he returns from the brink of death. It's worth highlighting the magnitude of the time Lincoln spent in the Father's care. Not only did months fly by with major events occurring in this new world that Lincoln was awakening to, but he would even gain consciousness from time to time to witness such events, watching the death of the civil rights leader Martin Luther King and the subsequent riots that transpired after his death that erupted all across the nation, or the assassination of U.S. politician Bobby Kennedy, were all things Lincoln would watch from the weakened state of his bed. As he slowly began to grow in strength, opening his eyes, being able to use his arms, and once ready begin the arduous task of learning how to walk again, the reality of this world he's really waking up to would begin to dawn on him. It's much darker, and he's more isolated than ever before. His closest loved ones, Sammy and Ellis Robinson, and both friends, Giorgi Marcano and Danny Burke, were all gone. 3 of them were killed and callously left to burn down with the building Lincoln is referred to as home close to a decade at this point. Sadness and confusion would soon give way to a boundless rage. There was no more time for mourning his lost loved ones. Now was the time to reflect the feeling of losing everything on the people responsible. The father, seeing Lincoln seething with rage, would warn him this is a path of anger and vengeance that if he goes down you can never return from. Lincoln would respond by sharing words the father would admit he's been trying to prove Lincoln wrong all about for the next 40 years. That turning the other cheek and not fighting doesn't work. Not in the real world. No matter how much Father James wishes that wasn't how things were, what happened with Sal Marcano proved to Lincoln otherwise. With these words, his mind is made up. John Donovan would take Lincoln to the charred remains of Sammy's bar to retrieve his stuff. Now was the time for war. As he walked through the burned bar, more of what happened that night would come back to him. Lincoln felt responsible for all of this. He would relive the moment Ellis was stabbed, Danny was shot, and Sammy was crawling for his life. He'd go down to the basement where he would shave off his beard. Slowly and methodically, he would shave the sides of his head, highlighting the scar he was left with by the bullet Giorgi fired at him. As his blade runs along the length of this painful memory, Lincoln would recall the conversation Sammy had with him before shipping out to Vietnam. Sammy would offer Lincoln a pocket watch he's had on him for many years. He wanted Lincoln to take it as a form of good luck charm. While wrapping it in the young Lincoln's hands, Sammy's words of Lincoln never being alone no matter how he felt would ring out.
I know you think you're alone in this world, Lincoln, but you're not. You never will be.
Ironic as a friend did this to him, and he must have felt a deep sense of remorse for the fate of his adopted family members. With a final deep breath and a look of determination, Lincoln set out to meet with Donovan. Donovan had been doing his homework on the entire city while Lincoln was recovering. He scraped together 3 prospects that could help prove to be of some use in their endeavor to dethrone Sal Marcano's empire. Lincoln's first concern was retaking the Del Rey Hollow from whoever assumed its head since the death of Sammy. With the collapse of the Black Mob following Sammy's killing, Del Rey Hollow had been placed under the control of the Dixie Mafia. Since they have taken over, the Hollow's been in the worst position it has ever been. The Dixie Mafia has been peddling heroin all around the district, trying to get as many people hooked on this stuff as they possibly could. Luckily, Lincoln just might be able to find an ally in the Haitians. Despite him killing their leader Baca, they never actually went away. They just laid low, and now they appeared to have a new leader, making some sort of resurgence and being a pain in the ass for the Dixie Mafia. The only problem is Donovan hasn't had any success in identifying who their new leader is. With him being white, the amount of progress he's been able to make in identifying their leader has come to a standstill, especially with the growing resentment between the local population and the Dixie Mafia, who Donovan could easily be mistaken as being a part of for just being white. So if he wanted to figure out who was in charge of the Haitians, Lincoln would have to do the remaining legwork. After interrogating a local foot soldier, Lincoln would discover their new leader was operating out of a local voodoo shop. Lincoln would break in and wait in the upstairs bedroom, ready to speak with the Haitians' new leader. As it turns out, their leader isn't new, nor is it a person Lincoln has seen for the first time. Cassandra has been in charge of the Haitians since the days they were causing problems for Sammy. Baca was just a fall guy. The night Lincoln arrived to kill the Haitian leader, Cassandra hid in a cabinet, pretending to be held against her will as a prisoner of Baca, whom Lincoln believed was the leader of the Haitian mob. With her admittance to being in charge and surprised that Lincoln is in fact alive and well, the two of them would come to strike a deal. Cassandra would provide Lincoln full access to all of her resources, her men, connections, weapons, and a place to stay from time to time. Considering the only ones giving the Dixie Mafia any type of resistance within the Delray Hollow was in fact the Haitians, this was the best opportunity for Lincoln to take back the Hollow. In exchange for Cassandra's help, Lincoln would let her run Delray Hollow however she saw fit, no questions asked, as soon as the Dixie Mafia was taken care of. Now, admittedly, it was an agreement that was shaky, to say the least. Many of the Haitians were aware Lincoln was responsible for the death of Baca, and convincing them to work with, let alone be under the person who was actively attempting to kill all of them months ago would not be easy. Many of them also still had a very negative perception of Sammy Robinson, whom they believed was a traitor, as there's racial reasons behind that. However, the start of winning over their help would begin through Cassandra. She would inform Lincoln the leader of the Dixie Mafia, Richie Doucette, the same man that had stabbed Ellis Robinson to death the night of Sal Marcano's betrayal, is responsible for the death of her sister as well. But Richie Doucette is no idiot. He knows the Delray Hollow isn't exactly safe for him, so he stays constantly on the move, making it difficult to pinpoint where he's at any given moment. But if Lincoln can take out the two rackets he's established within the Hollow, maybe they can draw him out. The first racket he would target is an old theater named Perla's. The theater was named after Sammy's wife, and since the Dixie Mafia took over it, they transformed it into a whorehouse. Their other racket was established in a community church, which would turn out to be the center of their heroin operation. If Lincoln could disrupt these rackets, Cassandra would send some of her men to overrun the location to ensure it didn't fall back into the Dixie Mafia's hands. Now, as for Lincoln, he wouldn't just successfully knock out both rackets, but with the help of John Donovan, would learn to tap phone lines. And he would do so eventually all across the city, but the origins of him doing this would begin here in the Delray Hollow. This would come into great effect as Lincoln ascends up the Marcano crime family hierarchy, as Donovan would continuously provide valuable confidential information on each target. Surprisingly though, the final piece of where Richie Doucette was hiding wouldn't come from Donovan. It would come from a captured foot soldier within the Dixie Mafia. Following Lincoln's disruption of the Dixie Mafia's rackets in the Hollow, the organization was severely handicapped in the capital it was earning, which in turn made them unable to pay Sal Marcano. A fallout between Giorgi Marcano and Richie Doucette would happen, causing Richie to retreat to the old abandoned Baron Saturday's Fun Park, a defunct amusement park on the boundaries between the Bayou and Delray Hollow. He's held up here with as much men as he could gather and whatever remained of his heroin. Since Giorgi promised to kill Richie hoped to skip town. That was until Lincoln Clay arrived and slaughtered every single one of his men, and would string Richie Doucette up by his neck at the top of the Ferris wheel.
I watched you stab Ellis in the gut. I couldn't do nothing about it then, but I sure as hell can now.
God damn it! None of that was my idea, you hear? It was all Giorgi, him and his old man. They wanted y'all gone, not me. What was I supposed to do? Say no?
Either that or make sure that I was dead.
Oh, no. No, please. Listen. Just decent thing would be to let a man get in a prayer before you kill him.
You can pray on the way up.
From this point forward, every one of Sal Marcano's capos, lieutenants, and racket leaders were all at war against the Phantom. The very public hanging of Richie Doucette was a message, displayed loud and proud that all who served Sal Marcano would soon join Richie. As McGuire would later share, the death of Richie Doucette was suspicious from the start. The mob waged wars on each other all the time, with bloodshed being a typical currency you'd come to be familiar with. But they were all self-contained events. He didn't believe Richie's murder was a mob hit job. It would definitely catch his interest, however, Lincoln was believed to be dead. The FBI didn't have a file on him, and all of Lincoln's military training, especially the detailed information on his training in psychological warfare, was all unknown to McGuire, since Lincoln's records were all classified. And so, Lincoln had a distinct advantage where no one would ever expect him as the one responsible for Richie's death or a few more subsequent lieutenants. No matter. With the death of Richie Doucette, The Hollow was now Cassandra's to rule over. Lincoln, at this time, would add one more condition to her reign now. Going after Sal Marcano would not be a cheap fare. He's essentially launching a war and expects a portion of everything Cassandra makes within the Hollow. Cassandra would accept, and so would conclude the business in Delray Hollow. Officially retaking the district, Lincoln referred to as his home for the last decade or so. With his home turf safely out of Marcano's influence, now was the time to scout for more prospects. Luckily for Lincoln, Donovan would be there to supply. Since the Federal Reserve heist, everyone involved in that job outside of Sal and Giorgi Marcano have ended up in a far worse position than before. The job that was meant to get them out from under Sal's heel actually put them right on his execution list. Arguably the worst of the two, whom were somewhat still around from that job, would be Vito. Vito and Sal hated each other. Vito would use all of his savings to cover the cost of the Federal Reserve heist, and by doing so he would put himself in a very vulnerable position. Despite helping with that job, he was still expected to kick up to Sal Marcano. Sal, in a very strategic move to finally rid this man of his life and organization, refused to pay Vito his cut of that job under the guise of not wanting to arouse suspicion, implying Vito would foolishly go out and just splurge the money he earned from this job on expensive vehicles and women, drawing unwanted attention. This meant all the money Vito lost would not be replenished, at least not immediately. This was all intentional. It was meant to further hinder Vito's ability to pay Sal his kickback, which would only get worse when Sal would also send in his nephew, Michael Greco, to quote-unquote help Vito run the operation of River Row. In reality, Michael Greco and his men were slowly taking over Vito's operations, further limiting his ability to pay up to Sal. Vito had already wasted all his savings. His rackets are slowly being taken over by Michael Greco, and this was all affecting his ability to pay Sal. The reason why Sal wanted to make sure that this happened was so Sal could provide the lack of payment to him by Vito to the commission, which would then be grounds for the commission to finally let Sal kill Vito, thus eliminating a man he so intensely despised and sees as a mole for the commission. Left with no more money to run, his quote-unquote official rackets taken over by Greco's men, Vito would manage to last a few more months by paying using off-the-book rackets he had. This still wouldn't be too much to keep Sal happy for that long. As Lincoln Clay was recovering from his gunshot wounds, Vito was beginning to live on borrowed time. Once Lincoln moved his attention over to Vito and taking over the River Road district of New Bordeaux, it would arrive to recruit Vito just in time. Greco was already making moves to silence Vito once and for all. Vito had been beaten, tied up, and locked inside the freezer of his own restaurant. Lincoln would kill all of Greco's men and let Vito out of the freezer, but this of course came with a small cost. Lincoln would propose a deal not entirely different from what he had proposed Cassandra before. Together, he and Vito would establish a foothold here in River Road District, return the entire district under the control of Vito, and in exchange for this, Vito would provide Lincoln Clay full access to men, connections, weapons, and safe houses. And of course, some kickback to fund the larger operation against the Marcanos. Vito would agree to all of this on one condition. Sal's nephew, the man that has been taking over Vito's rackets, is Vito's to kill. If Lincoln promises to bring him Greco, Vito would pledge his loyalty. And so, repeating as he had done before, Lincoln would target the two rackets Michael Greco took over from Vito. Just as doing so in Delray Hollow affected Richie Doucette's ability to kick up to Sal, thus causing Giorgi to want Richie killed, Greco would be placed in a very similar position. The only difference here was where there was rumors Giorgi wanted Richie killed, Sal on the other hand was much more proactive. He would actively send men to go and kill his nephew. Now, despite Greco being Sal Marcano's nephew, he was a nephew by marriage, not by blood, and he's proven to be quite useless, so there was no love lost on Sal's part concerning the death of Greco. Had it not been for Vito being so determined to capture Greco, Sal would have just had him killed, denying Vito his revenge and rejecting Lincoln some valuable information. You see, while interrogating Michael Greco, Vito would ask him why Sal wanted Vito dead so badly out of nowhere. Sure, they hated each other, but not to the point of jumping through every hoop to immediately kill Vito Scaletta. Greco would share the increased drive in whacking Scaletta was because Sal was afraid he was aware of him building the casino to the north of the city and would inform the commission of what he was doing. So he was putting an increased drive and emphasis on making sure Vito Scaletta, who he believed was a mole, would be killed. This new piece of information would ultimately change Lincoln in Donovan's tactics in going after Marcano. Well, the bigger picture was to systematically and methodically retake districts of the city from Sal Marcano and place them under Lincoln Clay's own underbosses, and killing all of the people Sal Marcano ever loved and respected. The tactics behind it would now change. As Donovan would later share with the committee, financially Sal was in a tough spot. Between the bribes he was paying for gambling to be legalized and the money needed to pay off the commission, Sal was stretched thin as it was. Targeting various entities tied to the construction of Sal's casino plans would simultaneously run his financial well dry while completely destroying the future he's staking so much in, putting Sal in a position where he would have to make very tough decisions that ultimately would limit the options he had. With River Row and Delray Hollow under Lincoln's control, he'd then head to the district of Point Verdun next to meet with Thomas Burke. Now, since the night of Sal's betrayal, Thomas has been a wreck. He pledged his son to be a part of the job he hoped would restore him in Sal's good graces, but it just left him worse off. Danny was killed, and Thomas, despondent at his son's death, would venture into a deli owned by Roman the Butcher Barbieri with a gun. Now, considering this whole stunt by Thomas happened while Thomas was completely shit-faced, all Thomas managed to hit with the gun he fired was a ham hock in a deli case, resulting in Roman's men beating the hell out of him and throwing him in a dumpster. Since then, he spent most of his time wallowing away at a dive bar. When Lincoln catches up to Thomas, it's clear he's still lost deep in his own pain. He'd share with Lincoln his son was so badly burned the coroner refused to let him see him. He doesn't want to get involved with Lincoln. He blames what happened to Danny on him, and he would attempt to drive away. But he's so drunk he can't find his keys, allowing Lincoln to take the wheel and scare Thomas into agreeing to hear him out. Thomas would relent, and the two would meet the following day at Thomas's scrapyard. Here, Thomas would share everything he knows about Barbieri. It's clear the hatred he has for his replacement still runs very deep. Barbieri, as it turns out, stole the moonshining operation from Thomas Burke, which is one of his rackets he still runs at a Point Verdun to kick up to Sal. The other one of his rackets is a slaughterhouse. Repeating what he had done before, Lincoln would target both of these rackets, which in turn would piss Barbieri off, and upon hearing his rackets were being not just disrupted but stolen by what appeared to be Thomas Burke's own men, Barbieri would give Burke a phone call. During this phone call, Barbieri would inform Burke he's coming to a scrapyard where the two of them can settle their score man to man. Burke would taunt Barbieri over the phone and tell him he'd be there waiting. This would piss Lincoln off, since, as he put it, you never tell your enemy where and when an ambush would be waiting, and Burke's recklessness can get them all killed. Burke would just smirk and scoff at Lincoln, tap him lightly on the face, and say, yes, he might get them killed.
You could get us all killed.
That I could.
Barbieri was a man of his word. Shortly after this interaction, he would personally launch an assault on Burke's scrapyard. Thanks to Lincoln's help, his attack was a massive failure, with waves of his men wiped out and Barbieri taken as Burke's prisoner. Burke would slowly torture Barbieri to death. Many years later, McGuire would share Barbieri's body wasn't found until the 1980s. It was stuffed inside of the trunk of a vehicle the Army Corps of Engineers pulled out of the bottom of the Mississippi River. While no one was able to properly piece together what happened to Barbieri, his remains were found to have both of his legs broken so many times there was barely any bone left. It was evident, for those that knew, Thomas Burke did in fact get his revenge. The death of Barbieri would conclude with Thomas Burke joining Lincoln Clay. Thus, the districts of Delray Hollow, River Row, and now Point Verdun were all safely out of the hands of Sal Marcano's influence. Now was the time to consolidate his alliance. Lincoln would call a sit-down at an old plantation house outside of New Bordeaux. This was neutral territory for all three of his new underbosses, and far from anyone that would be potentially spying for Sal Marcano. Initially, the alliance's beginning between Thomas Burke, Vito Scaletta, and the woman known as Cassandra was uneasy. Cassandra distrusted Thomas and Vito. Both were formerly Sal's lieutenants. Vito's men had killed countless of her men, all because quote-unquote Sal told him to, while Vito had no respect for Thomas, who he refers to as derogatively. Lincoln, having no time for their crap, would remind all of them, while they may not trust each other, they must not forget that he doesn't trust any of them. But that doesn't change how he stopped Barbieri's operation, saved Vito from the freezer, and killed Richie Doucette while eradicating the entire Dixie Mafia from the Delray Hollow. If they don't like the plan, or if they don't like to work with each other, they are all free to go, but if they leave, Lincoln's adding their name to his hit list right under Marcano's. The hatred for Marcano far dwarfs any distrust they have between each other, so they all choose to sit down and listen to Lincoln's plan. Here, Lincoln laid it all out for them. They're going after Marcano's entire empire from the base and working their way up. First, his lieutenants, next his capos, and finally Sal Marcano would be isolated and alone. As Lincoln takes out the lieutenants and capos, he'll make the decision on which of the three underbosses gets control of the day-to-day and which district, along with the rackets within said district. But that would mean he's counting on them to hold on to their new territory and make sure Sal doesn't claim it back. Similar to the fate of the districts Lincoln put within their possession to begin with, he expected a kickback of everything they earned within all the districts under their control. During this meeting, Lincoln would also debrief them on the casino Sal Marcano was building. All of his plans to take down Marcano's empire was strategically designed to go after the plans of constructing this casino. Knowing this building was an emotional attachment to Sal Marcano, as they start chipping away more and more at the prospect of this thing going up successfully, the more Sal would become emotional. Having such an emotional attachment to said thing would ultimately cause him to make many mistakes. When the time is right, they'll deal with him.
And the systematic killing of Marcano's capos and lieutenants, that was part of the plan.
Well, you're playing fucking patty cake, Christ. Look, you want to bring somebody down, you destroy the foundation they're standing on. It's the same basic op we ran over Nam.
At the base of Marcano's operations were the names of Enzo Conti, Frank Pagani, and Tony D'Orazio. Each in charge of their own district, each had some hand in not just Marcano's larger operation, but the construction of the casino. According to John Donovan, Enzo Conti was a 61-year-old traditional mobster. Out of the three lieutenants, he's the one that potentially could be flipped. Enzo Conti ran the Barclay Mills district, and it was through his trains that all the heavy construction equipment and supplies for the casino, such as the steel and concrete molds, came into New Bordeaux. Such items were worth millions of dollars, so Enzo Conti had to trust all of these shipments with someone. They couldn't be placed in Sal's name as he was a felon, but Donovan wasn't able to properly pinpoint who this person was because the paperwork was a giant maze. So the only person that can identify the figure that was receiving these items on behalf of Sal was Enzo Conti. Luckily, after hearing what happened to Sammy Robinson, Enzo became wary of his position working with Marcano. He started to firmly believe with the construction of Marcano's casino and his attempt at going legitimate, everyone involved would in the end end up getting screwed, save for Sal and his son Giorgi. Given enough trouble, Enzo Conti might be able to be flipped. After Lincoln started to attack Enzo's train yards and waste disposal business, Enzo was placed in a position very similar to Michael Greco, where Sal started to send hitmen after him. Enzo would strike a deal with Lincoln. If he helps him get out of the city, he'll tell Lincoln who received the construction material. Lincoln would agree, and the two of them would fight their way through Sal's hitmen. Now, the whole time with Enzo was different, to say the least. Enzo was somewhat open with Lincoln, on account of Enzo having history with Sammy Robinson. Enzo respected the man, and he would share the love and admiration Sammy had for Lincoln, even telling him Sammy loved him more than he would ever know. He provides some reassurance beyond just what Donovan was providing, that what happened to Sammy and Ellis wasn't Lincoln's fault, and none of them, especially Sammy, didn't deserve what happened. Enzo would provide one more apology before he prepares to leave New Bordeaux, enjoying his life of retirement. As he begins to leave, he'll inform Lincoln the person that received the shipments on behalf of Sal Marcano was in fact Remy Duval. Remy Duval owns the land the casino's being built off of. He owns the construction company, and as long as all of that is in his name, he knows Sal can't touch him. Remy lives up in the area of Frisco Fields, but Olivia Marcano, Sal's sister-in-law, is keeping close tabs on him. They can't afford Sal's only legitimate business partner to get into any trouble, so Olivia's making sure Remy stays low-key. If Lincoln is to go after Remy, Olivia would be right there. So when he's ready to venture into Frisco Fields and deal with Sal Marcano's legitimate business partner, Lincoln better be prepared to deal with whatever Olivia Marcano would throw at him. With the departure of Enzo Conti, Lincoln and his underbosses next looked to the downtown district of New Bordeaux. And thanks to the surveillance Donovan was running, they knew that this district was under the control of Tony D'Orazio. D'Orazio is a lieutenant that reports directly to Lou Marcano. Lou, or Uncle Lou, as he was known all around the city, became the face of New Bordeaux over the years. This cultivated a very positive public opinion of Lou, but behind closed doors, Lou was in charge of grooming politicians and bigwigs in New Bordeaux to use to Sal's advantage. According to Jonathan Maguire, he established ties to various influential figures within New Bordeaux, including politicians, lawyers, bankers, and merchants, using his accountant, Tony D'Orazio, to bribe corrupt city officials. All of Lou's rackets were ran in the French Ward District for the VIP and special clientele privileges. But in order for Lincoln, Donovan, and the rest of Lincoln's crew to even gain access to the French Ward, let alone Uncle Lou himself, D'Orazio had to be dealt with first. But as per usual, D'Orazio was a difficult target to get to. He was always barricaded in his penthouse in the Royal Hotel. The hotel itself was crawling with D'Orazio's men, and if Lincoln somehow managed to get past all of them, he would then need a special code to gain access to the elevator, as that was under restricted access. But D'Orazio had a temper. Donovan mentioned he had watched D'Orazio for over a month, and within that time span, he only left the hotel one time, and that was because one of his men had fucked up. This prompted D'Orazio to leave just to go and punish the offender. If Lincoln could interfere with the businesses D'Orazio was using as fronts to launder Lou's money, it could be his way to trick D'Orazio into leaving the building, giving Lincoln an opportunity to deal with the man outside the hotel, where his protection was the strongest. Later on in 1971, during Donovan's testimony with the committee, he would enlighten them on what happened to D'Orazio. Following Lincoln's efforts to stop the cash flow of D'Orazio's blackmail and construction rackets in his district, D'Orazio would kill one of his underbosses. Then he would place a man by the name of Dominic in charge of collecting any outstanding money owed to him. He would instruct Dominic to deliver all this cash directly to him at his penthouse in the Royal Hotel. Now, Dominic's car was familiar to the security guard watching the entrance to the Royal Hotel's parking garage, and Dominic was provided with a special code by D'Orazio in order to access the elevator, giving him a straight shot to D'Orazio's penthouse. If Lincoln was able to steal Dominic's car, he'd be able to bypass the men in the lobby, gaining access to the parking garage, and from Dominic, he would also be able to gain that code to the elevator. As Lincoln was heading up to D'Orazio's penthouse, D'Orazio didn't catch him coming up the elevator. He was too preoccupied with putting together the final payments for the politicians in Lou's books, who would make sure the legalization of gambling was pushed through as long as D'Orazio made sure their payments continued on time, with an increased importance on a judge whose identity was unknown to Lincoln at this time. But as Lincoln made his way through Tony D'Orazio's penthouse, he'd come to face fierce resistance by the men guarding D'Orazio. However, thanks to Lincoln's military training, he was able to best them and even get a fatal shot off on D'Orazio. As D'Orazio was bleeding on the floor, he'd comment to Lincoln that no one would notice he's gone. Come tomorrow, he'll be replaced and Lincoln will be right back where he started. Lincoln, after taking D'Orazio's personal financial ledger with all of Lou's clients written within it, would pick D'Orazio up, tell him he's wrong about no one noticing, and then throws him out the window of his penthouse.
You really think you know how all this is gonna play out, don't you? Idiot! Go ahead. Kill me. I'll be replaced tomorrow. No one will even notice.
You're wrong. Everyone will notice.
War on the streets of our fair city as a gunman stormed the Royal Hotel, killing an untold number of men.
D'Orazio's very public death would make national news. Despite Lincoln's actions being highly publicized, even Donovan had no idea how in the world Lincoln was able to escape a hotel of men that quickly flooded the building once D'Orazio was thrown out of the window, or escape a determined police presence. But did it really matter? Lincoln's miraculous escape was just par for the course. The Marcano criminal empire was being taken down by a phantom. The last of Marcano's lieutenants was Frank Pagani. Frank ran Tickfall Harbor, and he reported to Tommy Marcano, the youngest of Sal's siblings. Frank uses his ship, the Tanager, to smuggle things in and out of New Bordeaux. Now, for the last 8 months, he's been allegedly making trips to Bermuda. In truth, he's been going to Cuba. Sal Marcano used to run the old mob casinos down in Havana, and Donovan believes Frank has been going down to Cuba to bring back whatever's salvageable from the old casinos for the new ones Sal is building. Frank isn't currently within the city, he's out on one of those runs. But if Lincoln can go after any businesses tied to stolen cars or freight in the district, it may trigger Frank to return to New Bordeaux. This is precisely what ends up happening. Within the next few days, Frank would return, at which point Lincoln was there waiting for him. After bugging Frank's personal vehicle, Lincoln would track him down at a local garage in Tickfall Harbor. While making his way through the garage, Lincoln would make note of counterfeit money and a press. When he eventually catches up to Frank Pagani, who ended up fleeing in a high-speed car chase, Frank would not only explain all of the equipment Lincoln had seen, but he dropped the bombshell of Giorgi stealing the money plates the night of the Federal Reserve heist. According to Frank, Sal set up a counterfeit money operation in order to fund the construction of the hotel, as its construction was becoming too costly for him on account of the bribes and paying off the commission. But the money that was being produced wasn't being produced correctly, so Sal sent Frank to Cuba to smuggle back a man by the name of Alvarez to properly produce a legitimate-looking counterfeit bill. Alvarez, along with the money plates Giorgi stole with Lincoln's help, was picked up by Tommy sometime before Lincoln arrived at the garage Frank was hiding in. Before Lincoln can get any information on where Alvarez is being held, Frank would succumb to his wounds inflicted by Lincoln during the car chase. With the death of Frank Pagani, Tickfall Harbor was overtaken by Lincoln. The last of Sal Marcano's lieutenants are completely gone, and the path to Sal's capos was wide open.
I'm of two minds when it comes to Lincoln's legacy. On the one hand, he was a brutal criminal who killed God knows how many people, a new breed of mobster, a prototype for criminals to come. Someone like that doesn't deserve the position history has afforded him. He should be forgotten, erased. But I also understand that Lincoln had a significant impact on the Italian mob in this city. He did what the Bureau wouldn't or couldn't do. He finished them.
While Sal's capos were the bigger fish and the prime targets, there was also people of interest that were vital to Sal's operation. Remember, Remy Duval owned the land and construction company tied to the casino. He was also the only legitimate business partner Sal had. Alvarez was a talented counterfeiter, and there was a federal judge on Sal's payroll who would definitely make sure gambling becomes a legal business venture as long as his identity continues to be protected and his safety is secured. Considering its central location and the importance of the city's elite within the French War District, it seemed like the best place to start. With the fall of the French War District would come the city's corrupted officials and the Santa Claus image of Uncle Lou. While the identity of Uncle Lou's corrupted judge was coded within the ledger of Tony DeRazio's, keeping his identity a secret, Donovan had all of Lou's phones tapped. Should Lincoln continue to go after Lou's rackets here within the French ward, and word of what happened to DeRazio coming at the hands of someone intentionally going after the Marcano's associates, it may be possible to scare and pressure the judge into contacting Lou and revealing himself to Lincoln and Donovan. While going after these rackets, it could also simultaneously pressure Lou into making some kind of mistake, giving them an opportunity to go after Sal's older brother and thus overtaking the French ward for themselves. The French ward was a tricky district to overtake. Lou's rackets were centered around drugs and sex, with some legitimate bars thrown into the mix. Fortunately for Lincoln, as he was hitting the sex rackets, politicians, bankers, and any other figure with a public image would attempt to distance themselves from Lou and his businesses, avoiding of being sucked into any type of fallout. This is precisely what led to George Cornelius Holden contacting Lou and mentioning over the phone, with the state of the city seemingly collapsing thanks to this Lincoln Clay figure, Lou's brother's case isn't going anywhere. Finally, Lincoln and Donovan not only had a name, but a face. But killing a federal judge wasn't the hardest part about getting rid of Holden. Holden was currently presiding over the Dupree trial. Hollis Dupree was a white man who had gunned down 2 African Americans under the pretense of defending himself. The public sentiment is Dupree was a racist who killed the 2 men who were just asking for help. This is a very closely watched trial, and because of that, Holden has a very high security detail, not just of the police force, but Lou's own best men. If Lincoln manages to kill Holden, it'll definitely kick up a lot of noise, and it'll officially make it clear to Sal he can no longer ignore the hell that's coming for him. Donovan will provide Lincoln with detailed information on the armored car Judge Holden is traveling in. courtesy of Lou Marcano, the window he's scheduled to leave from the courthouse, and the location of Holden's house, a stop that he makes quite frequently. When and how Lincoln decides to deal with Holden is completely left up to him. Lincoln would fight his way through Lou's men and officially silence the corrupted judge. While Holden was a vital asset, he wasn't the only politician in Lou's pocket though. Following Holden's death, Sal would summon his brother, and the two of them would get into it on account of Sal losing so much money. The money he's losing is now hitting a point where it's becoming irreplaceable. He's been greasing up Holden for at least months now, and that lifeline is completely gone. Lou would offer a replacement via State Senator Walter Jacobs. Lou mentions Jacobs has a thing for cheating on his wife. He could salvage the situation if Sal greenlights him to throw a quote-unquote political fundraiser for Senator Walter Jacobs on his riverboat. Lou would pick the guest list personally, he'd map out the route of the riverboat down the bayou, he'll get Senator Jacobs laid, and then he'll present him with so much money he can't afford to say no. With no other option, Sal would approve the plan, but he would warn Lou, if this fails, everyone is screwed. Being the right-hand man of Lincoln's operation, Donovan had already surveyed the route of Lou's riverboat beforehand. There was an old coal dumper along the route he had rigged with explosives. When the time was right, all Lincoln had to do was blow the explosives. It should block the riverboat's path, giving Lincoln a chance to board the ship. As per usual, the plan went slightly wrong when the dumper actually hit the boat, causing a fire to break out. Nonetheless, this was how Lincoln was able to gain access to the boat, allowing him to easily dispatch Lou's security detail and make his way over to where Senator Jacobs and Lou Marcano were hiding. Jacobs' body would later be found on the damaged riverboat, badly burned, while Lou Marcano's body would be discovered sometime later. It was badly mutilated and strapped to a statue of former President Andrew Jackson in the French War District. The first of Sal's bloodline has now officially been claimed by Lincoln, and Lou's body was displayed in the district he previously ran, with the sign stating to re-elect the corrupt, now deceased Senator Jacobs. Lou and Jacobs' death sent a shock to Sal's core, but the real blow, emotionally and financially, would come next. Following the takeover of the French War District, Lincoln set his sights next on South of Downs. That was the area of New Bordeaux supervised by Sal's youngest brother, Tommy. Tommy was placed in charge of Alvarez, the counterfeiter Frank Pagani had smuggled in from Cuba. But as Lincoln started targeting South Downs, Alvarez has become extremely paranoid. He's escaped both Lincoln and Tommy's men, believing all of them were trying to kill him. Afraid for his life, Alvarez would try to contact his uncle, a man by the name of Zaraga, back in Cuba to try and put together some way to return to Cuba. Now, there isn't much known on Zaraga besides him being a police officer in the Havana police force, so Alvarez believed he would be able to be of some use. However, Zaraga ran the security for the mob casinos down in Cuba back when they were in operation. He and Sal went way back, so instead of securing a way for his nephew to return to Cuba, he'd tell him to wait at a lighthouse under the guise of a boat coming to pick him up. In reality, Zaraga contacted Sal that his nephew was held up in this lighthouse. He can go send some men over to pick him up. Again, thanks to Donovan tapping all of Sal's associates' phone lines, Lincoln was able to be alerted to all of this and arrived just in time to deal with Sal's men, but Alvarez was more paranoid than ever. Seeing Sal's armed men arrive at the lighthouse, he believed everyone again was there to kill him. He barricaded himself in this lighthouse and would fire at anybody brave enough to step foot within the building. Despite the man being terrified for his life, Lincoln would manage to get him to listen to some reason. He shared his uncle had betrayed him, and that Lincoln had no wish to kill Alvarez. All he wanted was some information. He was still looking for where Tommy Marcano has set up the counterfeit money operation. If he tells Lincoln where the money plates and all the equipment has gone, then Lincoln will help Alvarez escape the city. Alvarez would share the money plates along with all of the equipment was waiting for him at a boxing gym. He doesn't know where or what the name of this gym is, just that it's been up and running for some time. Content with this, Lincoln would take Alvarez to Father James, who would manage to smuggle Alvarez out of the city. With Alvarez officially out of the city and the Marcanos having no way of finding out where he's gone off to, their counterfeit operation was somewhat dead in the water. During Donovan's testimony to the committee, he would lay out everything that happened next. Thanks to Alvarez going missing, Tommy would double down his security at the boxing gym. He knew Lincoln would come after the press machine and would attempt to destroy it, but Tommy wasn't willing to cancel the fights going on at the gym. Doing so would jeopardize his public image, and he wasn't willing to sacrifice that, not even in the midst of Lincoln's ongoing rampage all across the city. Lincoln would use this to his advantage. He would gain access to the gym thanks to Donovan tracking down Alcee Bennett. Elsie was a small-time hustler that previously worked for Sammy until Elsie was caught stealing money. He's been banned from Delray Hollow since, but he's been making a living recruiting black fighters for Tommy Marcano's underground fights. If Elsie vouched for Lincoln at the front door, Lincoln would be allowed in, no questions asked. And so Lincoln would strike a deal with Elsie. If Elsie did whatever Lincoln wanted, his banishment from Delray Hollow would be lifted. And that is how Lincoln managed to gain access to the gym. As it turns out, that was the easy part. Tommy knew exactly who Lincoln was and what he looked like. So after Lincoln won round after round in the ring, he'd be greeted by Tommy and a handful of armed men in the locker room. They would knock Lincoln unconscious, and later when he came to, he was strapped to a chair while Tommy was pouring gasoline over him, taunting him. The gasoline had been mixed with vegetable oil, making it stick to the body and burn just like napalm. Sometime during Tommy's dialogue, Lincoln would manage to break free from his restraints, kill all of Tommy's bodyguards, and get a shot off into Tommy's stomach. As Tommy lay on the floor bleeding, Lincoln grabbed the same can of gasoline that was poured all over him, and he would begin to pour it on the money press, all the counterfeit money, in the spot all around Tommy. With one flip of a lighter, Tommy, the money press, and the gym would all go up in flames.
Yeah. You are who you are. No point in arguing with yourself about it.
Fuck you.
Lou's death was destructive to the operation. Tommy's death destroyed Sal. He'd share how he wanted his little brother to go do something meaningful with his life, to go to college, and he'd pay for it all, but Tommy chose this life and he paid for it. Left with no more options, Sal turned to Giorgi to contact Sant'Angelo. Sant'Angelo's a small character that ultimately gets killed by Lincoln as well, but he's worth at least bringing up because with everything crumbling all around him, Sal was desperate to make sure his casino was built. Lincoln was rapidly exhausting all of his revenue sources, so he could no longer afford anything beyond just paying off the commission. Giorgi had already done business with Sant'Angelo, as he was the one providing the heroin that was flooding Delray Hollow back when the Dixie Mafia took the district over. With Giorgi mediating, Sant'Angelo and Sal would strike a deal. Sant'Angelo would provide Sal with the remaining money he needed to finish off the construction of his casino. In exchange, Sant'Angelo was allowed to sell heroin in all of New Bordeaux, without any interference from Sal in any way. While extremely reluctant and somewhat remorseful about it, Sal would agree. And as an added little benefit on top of that, Sant'Angelo would promise that he would take care of Lincoln Clay for him. Sant'Angelo's promise of killing Lincoln is extremely short-lived. Considering he was a massive racist, he horribly underestimated Lincoln, but the fact that Sal was willing to just let the entire city flood with drugs he was so passionately against, absolutely refusing getting into any kind of business with, just shows how bad of the position he was being placed in, especially since the meeting with Sant'Angelo basically showed Sal bend a knee and beg for his money, further humiliating the once powerful mob boss.
I'm building a casino across the lake. I had it all worked out, including how I was gonna pay for it. Now it's all a goddamn mess.
You want my money?
Well, I'm gonna need enough to finish the construction. It ain't gonna be cheap.
I want to hear you say it.
Say what?
That you want my money. Say those words. Please.
I want your money.
This is good.
With the politicians taken care of, the counterfeiter gone, and the capos presiding over such matters dead, Lincoln can now focus on Frisco Fields, the district under Olivia Marcano's watch. This was also the area of Sal's one and only remaining legitimate business partner, Remy Duvall. Remy was somewhat an easy target. Remy was perhaps most known for his radio show Native Son, which aired on WBYU. He used the program to advocate for what he considered important ideals that supports his conservative Christian values and Southern way of life. He would use this platform to discuss significant topics to the times, like the ongoing Black Power movement, as well as the fertility of hippie counterculture. Of course, that was all his public image. Behind closed doors, Remy Duvall had some major skeletons in the closet. Remy is a white supremacist and a leader of a racist group known as the Southern Union, which itself was based out of Frisco Fields. Aware of Remy's racial beliefs, Lincoln believed that as he put pressure on Frisco Fields, Remy's beliefs in turn would become challenged and force him to abandon the safety Olivia Marcano has set for him, not only making a very public appearance, but doing so in a way that will expose him as the hate-filled person that he is. His pride would be his downfall, as he wouldn't stand for a black man such as Lincoln Clay terrorizing the white people of Frisco Fields. And as it turned out, Lincoln's plan would work comically well. Lincoln's actions of actively disrupting the affairs of the Southern Union, freeing human-trafficked African Americans, and destroying some of the PCP labs Olivia was running, Remy would end up calling for a gathering of the Southern Union. The point of this meeting was for Remy, after delivering a very passionate, racially charged speech, was to then lead a war party of white supremacists down to Delray Hollow and burn everything to the ground, forcing Lincoln out of hiding. To the absolute horror of Remy, Lincoln wasn't in Delray Hollow. He was but a few feet away, witnessing his speech personally. When the time was right, Lincoln would open fire on every single person dressed in their Southern Union robes. Remy would end up getting injured in the process, but oh so defiant to the end, he'd spit in Lincoln's face and call him one final slur. Lincoln, in the coldest form of restraining his rage, would stare at Remy and tell him he can have it his way. The next day, Remy's charred body was found strapped to a cross.
A horrific scene here in Frisco Fields as one of the city's most prominent citizens, Remy Duval, was savagely murdered. Witnesses report he was bound to a cross and set on fire.
The symbol used as a beacon and message of hate was Remy's final resting place. His death would send Sal spiraling out of control. Remy's will didn't actually name him or any of his associates as Remy's beneficiary. The land and the construction company tied to the casino was all put down to be received by his nephew, Stephen DeGarmo. Sal's last capo, Olivia, would attempt to calm him down. She would reassure him that there was still a way to reclaim the land and the company. Since she was a business partner of Remy's in a number of business ventures, Remy had actually revised a version of his will 6 months ago, but it was never executed as it needed a signature. This could provide Olivia an opportunity to contest the rightful beneficiary to Remy's estates. In the meantime, as Sal's money was continuing to dwindle, and afraid of the legal battle that contesting the will would draw them down into, Olivia would propose the plan of approaching Stephen DeGarmo and offering him a percentage of the casino's profits should he sign the property over to them. In time, they'll just take care of him and remove him as a quote-unquote partner. And so that was the official plan moving forward between the two of them. Now, Olivia's position within Sal's bigger operation was unknown to many people. Even the committee many years later struggled to identify what Olivia Marcano had to do with the business ventures of Sal Marcano. By all accounts, Olivia Marcano actually had 2 to 3 times more money than Sal, so what interest could she have in all of this? Well, according to Donovan, Olivia actually wasn't in this for the money. She was completely enthralled by the lifestyle of being involved with the mob or mafia affairs. She cared little for the money. She was just, in other words, batshit crazy. There was even rumors that she orchestrated the death of her husband, Lucio, one of Sal's brothers. She romanticized the mafia lifestyle, and this would continue into the death of Remy Duval. Following Remy's death, Olivia Marcano held a wake for her fallen business partner, and she held it at the same country club Lincoln met with Sal Marcano to discuss the Federal Reserve heist so long ago. The wake itself was, yes, a way to honor Remy, but Olivia's true goal was to use it as a way to lure Stephen DeGarmo and allow Sal's men to do a little persuading. While all of the guests were paying their respect to the late Remy Duval, his nephew was being tortured out in the pool house, forcing him to sign over the property to Sal Marcano. Lincoln would gain access to this event through a very thin disguise. As Donovan put it, the venue was ran by a bunch of rich, racist assholes. Put a black man in a suit and tie, and he's practically invisible, since he'd automatically be considered part of the help. Donovan would even drop Lincoln off the front door. They were so confident in this disguise. Now, obviously, that was just for the surface level stuff. For the more vigilant of Olivia's men, the people that also knew what Lincoln looked like, Donovan created a fast-acting LSD. It's a recipe he had learned as part of the MKUltra project, and he would hand it to Lincoln, who would drop this LSD into the wine bottle served at the venue. Anybody who had even the slightest sip would be whacked out of their mind in minutes. And that's how Lincoln managed to gain access to Olivia Marcano's private headquarters. Just as before, Lincoln would kill all of Olivia's men, even shooting Olivia, but unlike all the other capos, Lincoln didn't kill her. The gunshot wound he inflicted wasn't even fatal. Donovan testified Lincoln wouldn't kill women unless he absolutely had to. He left her to live that night. While her body was discovered sometime later with her throat slit in a hospital bed, Donovan would passionately reject that was Lincoln's doing. Lincoln left her alive that night. Anything that happened after had nothing to do with Donovan or Lincoln Clay. Well, what happened to Stephen DeGarmo? Well, Donovan would share after leaving Olivia in her headquarters, Lincoln would arrive to save DeGarmo just in time. While he had received quite a beating, he didn't sign anything over. Lincoln would take DeGarmo to Donovan, who refuses to disclose where DeGarmo ended up that night or where he is now. That's only for Donovan to know, and it's gonna stay that way.
And after Lincoln Clay killed the last capo, that's when he turned his sights on Sal Marcano.
Listen, it's like I said before. It's the same off who ran over in Vietnam. You want to bring down the dipshit in charge? You target their men and infrastructure. Eliminate their ability to fight back. And before they know it, they're standing there all alone, ass hanging.
Capos, lieutenants, politicians, public figures, none of them could save Sal. Everyone who was ever known to be associated with him or tied to his casino in some way, shape, or form was all dead. Determined to go down swinging, Sal and Giorgi would scrape together whatever men they could still find. Men who had to be loyal. Lincoln's rampage all across the city made it clear this was no longer Sal Marcano's city. Anyone who had the slightest amount of ambition to be more than just a two-bit hustler would be tripping over themselves to take the throne of Sal Marcano. The Marcanos knew Lincoln was still coming for them, so they'd be ready for a fight that Lincoln has been calling them up to since the day he strung up Richie Doucette in the Delray Hollow. Now, in preparation for the final assault on the casino, Donovan torched his entire TAC Ops center, getting rid of any evidence that he helped out Lincoln Clay. This was because he was certain all of Lincoln's actions would bring a ton of unwanted attention to himself and Donovan. This was just a safety measure. With final instructions to meet Donovan at the church in the French Ward District with Father James, Lincoln would set off to finally confront the Marcanos and put this whole thing to rest. When Lincoln finally arrived at the casino, it was an odd sight. With no more funding of any kind, the land now owned by somebody else, all the politicians in place to legalize gambling all gone, it was a completely hopeless venture. What did manage to get constructed and somewhat finished was essentially frozen in time. It was a monument to everything Sal was and everything his legitimate way of life could have been. And that monument quickly became a symbol of the immense amount of success Lincoln Clay was able to obtain during his war against Sal. As he fought through the lobby's entrance in the main casino hall, the air got thicker. His blood became electrified. His moves more calculated than ever before. None of Marcano's men, what remained of them anyway, could stop this now unstoppable force. Eventually, Lincoln would find his former friend and attempted killer, Giorgi, held up in the security room. It appeared he had already assumed the position of a non-existent pit boss for a casino that would never be. Lincoln would manage to exchange some words to Giorgi, mentioning how he believed he was his friend, that he didn't decide to kill Lincoln because Lincoln rejected their offer to run the Hollow, but because they believed they owned all of them. Giorgi, with no remorse or the slightest sign of bending the knee, set it all straight. He admitted he only tried to kill Lincoln because it was all what his father wanted. He did what he was told, and that was no difference than what Lincoln or Sammy once did, just blindly follow the orders of Sal Marcano. Lincoln should understand, as he was once in that same position. Lincoln would likewise tell Giorgi then he should understand what he has to do. With those final words, Lincoln would stand Giorgi up and slide his blade into his stomach and up into his chest.
Never about us, about my old man, my father. I'd do anything for him. Same as you and Sammy.
And you understand why I have to do this?
Now, everything Sal ever cherished was officially gone. Following Giorgi's very personal killing, Lincoln would then find Sal alone at the top of the casino. There wouldn't be any anger or arguing. Sal's accepted everything. His fate is sealed and he's made peace with that. He would just offer a drink to Lincoln and the two of them would talk, open up a little bit to each other. Sal shared how this casino was his way to avoid a nightmare that he's been having. One that one day he would have to bury his son Giorgi, getting caught up in this horrible way of living. It was a nightmare he had to live through with the death of his brother Lucio, and he was willing to do whatever it took to not relive that horrible feeling with the death of his son. Ironically, doing everything in his power to avoid that outcome actually led to that very thing. Maybe even with this outcome being much worse, as both of his brothers were killed in the process, on top of Giorgi. Lincoln in turn would open up about his dream of being back over in Vietnam.
At one where I'm back in Nam, sleeping in a foxhole. All of a sudden these dark figures come out of the shadows. I try to fight them off, but they hold me down, tie my hands together, stuff a muddy rag in my mouth so I can't scream, can't warn the men sleeping next to me. And then I gotta listen as all those men die.
I would imagine that's not gonna go away anytime soon.
No. I imagine it won't.
After finishing a drink with the son's killer, it was now Sal's turn to fall to Lincoln's hands. Lincoln would stab him and throw him out of the window from the top of his casino. The reign of Sal Marcano was now officially over. With Sal's death, the throne in New Bordeaux was officially up for the taking. Leo Galante, on behalf of the commission, had, by chance, made contact with Lincoln as he was leaving Sal's casino. The two of them would strike somewhat of a deal, or at the very least, an understanding. He informed Lincoln the commission is aware of who Lincoln Clay is and what he's been up to. They want him and anyone else tied to Lincoln's actions dead. Leo is here to make sure Lincoln's rampage ended with Sal, and if Lincoln can confirm that, having no ambitions or desire to go after anyone else that's part of the commission, then there would be nothing to worry about on either side. Lincoln would tell him he had no quarrel with any of them. This was now officially put behind him. Content with that answer, Leo would then tell Lincoln that Sal's been kicking up 20% of his official net earnings to the commission. The same man has been delivering it in all cash to the commission for the last 20 years. Galante sees no reason to change this arrangement. Lincoln can be left to run New Bordeaux however he liked. If he so choose to, he can sell heroin, extort, place whorehouses on every corner, you name it. All the commission and Leo really cared about was their 20% kickback. That is, of course, unless Lincoln chooses to leave the city, in which case the both of them never met. From here, you're able to take the throne for yourself or stick to Lincoln's original plan. Leave New Bordeaux, head out to California, and work at the shipyard thanks to the friend he met in the service. Personally, I like the idea of Lincoln leaving. It adds to this phantom figure that raised all hell across an entire city, only to vanish as quickly as he came. McGuire would continue to do his best to track him down and hope that one day Lincoln would slip up, and with this mistake, give Jonathan McGuire a chance to bring in Sal Marcano's boogeyman. Throughout this documentary, McGuire does betray a lot of mixed emotions towards Lincoln, so his obsession of continuing to track this man down, I think, makes sense in the context of Lincoln leaving. It also fits with the father continuing to receive postcards from Lincoln, keeping up to date on where he is and how he's doing. Considering the father, aside from the Robinsons, was the only family Lincoln had, it adds a tear-jerking sort of happy ending. Father James wanted Lincoln to leave New Bordeaux as he did feel Lincoln had nothing good left for him here, and so it was one of those situations where I love him, but I love him from a distance. I'm happy to see him thriving. As for Donovan, well, following the death of Sal Marcano, Donovan revealed he went into Sal's files, and he discovered the assassination of President John F. Kennedy actually had some mob ties behind it. According to the paperwork, Sal Marcano and a group of conspirators killed President Kennedy. Senator Blake, the main senator running the committee, would reply that that's the most absurd thing he's ever heard, to which Donovan replies by pulling out a silenced pistol, aiming it at the senator. As he approached the senator, with the gun pointed directly at Senator Blake, Donovan explains that he was surprised when he saw Senator Blake's name over and over again all over Sal Marcano's paperwork, especially the stuff tied to the killing of President Kennedy. With the camera still rolling and in front of all the witnesses, Donovan then proceeds to shoot Senator Blake. Turning toward the camera, Donovan then waves his gun in front of all the members of the committee, saying all the conspirators that had a hand in the death of President Kennedy would be on Donovan's hit list.